Alrighty, everybody, thanks for tuning back in here to another episode here on the Speedbug channel. Today's video that I decided to do, I think it'd be something a little bit different because I haven't really seen it been done, and a lot of other people that have a lot of other bikes don't really do this with their bikes, but I'm going to do it. So I'm going to actually tell you the bikes that I like to ride and work on and have a fun factor, race, street drive, all of that all in one, and rate them, you know, all the way from the bike I like the most to the bike I like the least. And I think a lot of you will actually be surprised on where some of them fall in my head, in my category. Now, this doesn't mean that one is necessarily a better performer here or there or anything like that. No, this is all just my personal opinion and my perspective based on the bikes that I currently own and obviously their current model years. And they're all pretty new, but the oldest one in here is the BMW, and that is a 2015. The rest are 17s and 18s and stuff like that. So, but let's just get on with the video, and I'm going to tell you, you know, like again, it's going to obviously fall into the fact of how I like riding it. So like the comfortability is definitely a huge factor in it. Obviously, since I do all my own maintenance on my motorcycles, that is going to play a big role in it as well, because if I don't like to work on it, it also is going to piss me off as well, because if I ride it, then it's going to have maintenance, and I don't even want to work on it if it's such a pain in the ass. And trust me, there's some in here that are more of a pain in the ass than others, as well as how they perform on the street, as well on the track, and of course, always how they look. And because I love the looks of all of my bikes, and of course, some look better than others. So let's get on to it. All right, so we ready? Let's start with since I have 8 bikes that are mine, let's start with number 8. Which one of y'all do you think that I like riding the least of all of them? Well, I'm gonna walk over to it. Let's do it. It is definitely the Ducati V4. It is the bike that I probably love the most as far as the way it looks. As I've mentioned in many of my videos and stuff like that, it's probably my favorite looking bike in the entire garage. But as far as riding the bike itself on the street, where I primarily ride this motorcycle on the street, it is definitely the bike that I actually ride the least in all of my collection, and it is the bike that I probably care for the least as well. And if I was going to get rid of a bike first, of course, this is definitely going to be the first one to go. Yes, it's gorgeous, yes, and everything like that, but it's just not the bike for me, as I've mentioned in a lot of my other videos. As far as the way it performs, when you're going slow on the street, it absolutely sucks, as I've mentioned. When you're dipped down, about to drag a knee, and you're tucked in, and you got your arms and such, you know, molded to the gas tank, it's absolutely flawless. But it's just not the bike for me. And as far as wrenching on it, it can be kind of tedious sometimes because everything is very well crammed in this bike, a lot more than the others. And I would definitely say, as far as the wrenching on this bike particularly, it's probably almost the worst. There's probably one other bike in here that's the worst as far as wrenching on, as far as getting into tight areas. But this is definitely going to make the bottom of the list for the bike that I absolutely dislike riding the most. And of course, the heat. It's absolutely absurd. I mean, if you're almost going to be sterile every time you're going to ride this motorcycle, and it boils the insides of your legs. So it's just not the bike for me. But again, it's still pretty. Some people really love it. Some people really hate it. Whether you agree with me or not, the hell, this is my opinion. So that's what it is. Number 7, which bike do I like to ride the least in the entire garage? Well, that's going to boil on over here to the Ducati 959, and a lot of for the same reasons, for the Ducati V4. Just doing general maintenance and stuff like that, it's a little bit easier on this bike, but not too much. It's still very crammed. The maintenance intervals is kind of low. So you do have to kind of service it, you know, often, but it's just other things I've mentioned about other Ducatis and stuff like that, where they consistently leak oil and grease stains and breather oil leaks and stuff like that. It's just not ideal, again, for me. For all of the other reasons, the seat is very hard. The riding position is not ideal. The power is actually, I really like this power level for the street. It's not overbearing like some of the other bikes, like the GSXR and the BMW. But so that's kind of fun with this. But as far as like the riding position and stuff like that, and the maintenance to do the oil changes and stuff like that, it's just very tedious, and you have to be always super careful on some of the things that you're going to do, because I feel like they're made of glass. If you look at them wrong, sometimes they seriously might break. So it is what it is. But as far as the looks department, this is damn, I don't know. I mean, obviously you could see it's showing its age just a little bit, but some people actually prefer this nose as opposed to the Ducati V4. They're just two different looking bikes to me. I don't really think one really looks better, much better than the other. But this bike is flawless looking. I think it's a showroom, living room masterpiece. And if I don't sell it or anything, it's probably going to end up in my house because it's great. But for riding it on the street, it's just not the bike that I really care for the most. And that's just what it is. So it's the Ducati Crotch Rockets for me. I think that I'm probably going to be done with them after this time around. But some of the other ones I may reconsider. Number 6, this is probably going to come up as a surprise because I actually do ride this bike a little bit more often, but it still is a bike that I enjoy kind of riding the least. But time may change with this, and that is my Ducati X Diavel S. Now, the biggest reason why I least enjoy riding this bike so much, but at the same time I just love the way it rides, is very similar to because of the riding position that you are in. And it has a lot to do with the forward controls. Now, the forward controls serve a great purpose, just like mid controls serve a great purpose. But with forward controls, all of your weight is right here on your butt, and your spine, really compresses as it goes up and down on bumps. So after like an hour or two, stuff like that, because you don't have the foot support of them being here to kind of take some of that weight off, you tend to kind of feel it in your lower back after a while. But that's probably the biggest gripe about, of course, riding this bike. As far as everything else, the looks is killer. I would say this bike actually turns more heads than any other motorcycle that I have in my entire collection. It's like a spaceship. No one really knows what it is unless you're a motorcycle enthusiast. It drives great. The cruise control is great, but some of obviously the other things that are on it that consistently has problems, which also starts to put it at the bottom of my list. This bike is also the one that I kind of dislike wrenching on the most as well. Now, you would obviously kind of question it, be like, hey, why? It's a naked bike. Everything's kind of open. Well, it kind of is, but when you have to get into the nooks and crannies and take some of the fairings off to really get everything, because these are all really like beauty trims. You still have to get, up underneath there to do certain things. Sure, you can change the spark plugs because those are just right there on the side, but spark plugs ain't going bad in 5,000 miles, hopefully. I mean, this is Ducati, who the hell knows? But everything else, with like the key fobs and the displays malfunctioning and the brakes, this, that, the other, the sending unit going out, who knows? But I still really enjoy riding this bike because it's got an immense amount of horsepower, an immense amount of torque, and it puts the cruiser into like a whole nother category, and that's why I kind of like it. And plus, I use this bike also a lot to ride from back and forth to work because it's also not so aggressive. And when you're on kind of a little bit shorter rides, it really is good. This one's going to be number 5, and that is going to be the 2018 new Yamaha R1M1. And really, I'm saying this obviously because there's a few things. Now, working on this Yamaha, and you guys know that I'm not the biggest fan of Yamahas. But, hey, it is what it is, and this bike is fantastic and great. And I'll tell you why I like riding this bike so much is because it is super, super flickable and super, super light. A lot of people complain about the riding position on this bike. It really doesn't bother me, but over time, it definitely starts to obviously wear into your hands and to your feet. But some other people, now I am 5'10", and the seat is very wide, but this bike is very, very, very tall. Now I can't completely flat foot it, but I can have one foot on one and the other one kind of like this, you know, just up a little bit. It is a very tall motorcycle. And unless you're probably at least 6 foot, which many people obviously have complained about it on this motorcycle, you're probably not going to be able to flat foot it. It has obviously a very high lean range. The quick shifter works great. Everything else works perfectly great on this bike, and I love to run into corners and stuff like that with this specific motorcycle, and that's what makes this bike so fun. Again, what makes this bike not so fun is that when you do have to stop and go in between the traffic, the flat plane crank and stuff like that kind of tends to become a little bit of an annoyance. And you could see, but when this bike is rolling and you get it in the high RPMs and you really get to use the R1M suspension, it really becomes alive. Very similar to kind of like how the Ducati V4 is. But I think this bike, to me, just, again, like I said, as opposed to that bike when I made that video, this bike just suits me a little bit better than that bike. So this bike's going to fall in at number 4. And as far as wrenching on this bike, I've wrenched on many Yamahas in the past that I never cared for. And this one, they actually kind of got their shit together. So I can't complain. Number 4. Which one's going to come in at number 4? And that bike is going to be my Ducati Hyper Motard. And this bike provides me so much fun. And the reason why this bike is coming in at number 4, even though it kind of is a supermoto and it's super fast, which is why it's got its great characteristics, because it has way more horsepower than any other supermoto, but it's awfully and horribly, it's heavy. It's like 400 pounds. It's like just as heavy as a crotch rocket. But your normal dirt bikes and such have 20, 30, maybe a 450 has like 50 horsepower or something. Well, this one has well over 100. And this bike, your normal dirt bikes ain't doing 130, 140, 150 miles an hour. This one is. So there's some pros and cons to it as well. This has more street suspension. The dirt bikes have more trail and, you know, traditional motocross suspension. So there are both pros and cons to it as well. The V-twin and stuff like that on this bike, it's fantastic. This is actually the Ducati that's given me the least amount of problems, but at the same time, it gives a lot of problems. Like sometimes when you change the modes in the computer, when you change it with, you know, with the clicker button here, when you go to like sport, touring, urban, or whatever they're called in here, the check engine light comes on. Why? I don't know. Ducati needs to get their shit together. And of course, when you take it to Ducati, of course, it doesn't have any problems or anything like that. But it's weird. This is Ducati. I've noticed that they're super temperamental motorcycles, but at the same time, they're all pretty and beautiful. So I really like this bike. As far as working on this bike, everything that I've actually done on this bike is super easy. I don't mind working on it at all. It's the one I actually enjoy working on the most. But you just have to be prepared, you know, for some of the things that are going to come with Ducati. It's definitely by far from perfect, but it gives its values in other ways. So this one's going to come in at number 4. Number 3. What's coming in at number 3? Well, I'm going to tell you what's coming in at number 3. Number 3 is my Gramsci. And I love working on the Gramsci, but sometimes she can be a little bitch as well. Really haven't had any mechanical major issues with this bike except obviously my chain breaking and stuff like that. But as I've mentioned in many videos and stuff like that, my Grom and your Grom, if you're buying a Grom, make sure the one thing you're going to change is the chain, because the factory chain just sucks. Everything else with the bike has pretty much been flawless. Now, some of the things that I've done by like smoking my clutch because I've done a bunch of burnouts and wheelies and stuff like that, that's my own fault. Since then, I've upgraded it and stuff like that. No big deal. But everything else, I haven't had like any mechanical failures or anything with this bike. And I think mine's got coming up right on 4,000. And my girl's here has 5,500 and such like that. And still, no issues or anything like that. The only issue that we've had with both of the Groms is, I'll tell you, and that is definitely just the stock chain. And they just stretch, they wear out, they just suck. I think they use like a bicycle chain or something like that. They're just horrible. The tensile strength is not great, and they stretch, and they're just horrible. Clutch wise and stuff, she doesn't, you know, do any crazy hooligan stuff on her bike like how I do, but and her clutch is perfectly fine. So as far as working on this bike, super easy. Everything's out. It's like a little lawnmower engine. It's pretty straightforward. I've taken the clutches out, the baskets out, the counter shafts, gear shaft, transmissions, as you've seen probably in some of my other videos when I was doing my neighbor's ground, when I did all the extensions and stuff like that. So I don't actually mind working on this bike. A few things that I wish that weren't the way they were on the bike as far as the way the bike was engineered, but hey, when the bike's only $3,300 brand new, it's kind of really hard to argue with it, because when it does fall and when you do drop it, like when I did drop my Grom and scratched my front fairing when I was doing a wheelie, it was like $8 to fix. So really, what can you bitch about? That's never going to happen if you're on a motorcycle like the GSXR or anything like that. So that's absolutely not going to happen. But everything else with the motorcycle has been flawless, no complaints, and the bike is great. As far as the fun factor, you feel like a little clown and like a 2-year-old, and you have nothing but a big grin every time you ride it. So that's why this bike comes in. The biggest gripe that I have about this bike, it's just not fast enough. And when you kind of want to go fast and dick around and you see another bike and then you go, and you're just kind of, trying to catch up and stuff like that, but you can't because you're on the ground. But at the same time, that's also what makes it so much fun, is because you're just making all this damn noise and you ain't going nowhere. So, but the Grom comes in at number 3 of the bike that I love to ride the most. And I would say probably actually the biggest gripe actually I have about this bike just is the factory seat. So you get an aftermarket seat like a Corbin or something like that, then your ass doesn't hurt after riding on it for an hour. But everything else with the bike is flawless. I love it. So that one comes in at number 3. Let's go to number 2. What is going to be the number 2? Now, I only got 2 bikes left, so which one do you think is going to be number 2 and number 1? Well, I'm going to tell you which one is number 2 and number 1. That one is going to be, number 2 is going to be my GSXR 1000R. Now, I bet you a lot of you guys thought that this bike was actually going to win, and it didn't. And what I don't like about this bike is that, of course, as you saw, some of the things that I said in my 5 things I dislike about my GSXR, like the handlebar vibrations and stuff like that. But the bike is great. There's just some things like the ECU tuning and stuff like that, and it came from Suzuki, just the way that it is, that just really bothers me. As far as the exotic factor or anything like that, it just kind of looks like your traditional style motorcycle. Nothing too crazy, traditional style crotch rocket. But it gets down, and what I love about it is the engine, the VVT transmission. It's always in the power band, no matter where you are, whether you're in first gear or 6th gear. And you can primarily ride this bike on the street in any gear or in 6th gear all the time and have more than enough torque. Some things where it's kind of still showing its age is the display, because it's just an LCD display. It's no TFT or anything like that. Not that the BMW or anything has a TFT display or the other Ducatis, but hey, come on, you want to play with the big dogs and stuff like that? I mean, it's got the motor, but I don't know, I guess they just ran out of money for the display or something. As far as working on this bike, I think it's probably the easiest bike of all of my motorcycles to actually work on, and I enjoy working on this one the most. As far as riding it on the street, it's fantastic. I love riding it on the street. It has great street manners. The seat is nice and plush and cushiony. Your ass doesn't hurt after an hour, as even when you saw when I went and got this bike. I drove it all the way from Tampa all the way down to southern Florida, 3.5 hours, and I wasn't even ready to get off of it. It is fantastic. The suspension is great. Quick shifter's great. Clutch is great, brakes are great, everything's good about it. But it just didn't win it, and it didn't have everything that I wanted it to have for it, and there's just some things that it was lacking. So that's why it didn't win number 1. And number 1 is the bike that I still had the most, that I still love the most of all of my motorcycles in the garage. And if I only had to keep one, it's still going to be the BMW S1000 RR. This bike is still a 2015, and it has the Gen 1 suspension actually of what's on the Yamaha. And I still think that obviously that has updated software in Gen 2, but it's not that much better than this one, and it's Gen 1. BMW just did a fine job of everything with the heated grips and the heated accessories. Even when it had the factory exhaust and the factory computer. I rode this bike around for like 4,000 or 5,000 miles with the factory cats and the factory exhaust, because it was loud enough when it was stock. It made great power, and the bike is super smart. I've had a couple small hiccups here or there that everything has been replaced under warranty. One recall on the bike when it first came out, that was with the quick shifter. It was just like a malfunction, and of course BMW came to pick it up. They'll even give you a loaner bike if you need it. But seat is super plush. Super plush. I don't really get fatigued riding this bike. Of course, it has the electric dynamic suspension, so when you're riding around in the city, because I used to have this motorcycle a lot in Chicago and used to ride around in those huge potholes in the city, and you just adjust the compression and the rebound, it softens it up, and it drives like it's a Cadillac. Brakes are fantastic. I've slammed on these things at 180, 190, probably even 200 miles an hour many times. Absolutely flawless. And these are Brembo brakes. So I don't know what Brembo did to this bike or if BMW put their touch on it, but they definitely don't work to me as well as some of the other bikes. I'm going to say maybe the best bike besides this one as well that has the best brakes is for sure the V4, but all the other ones that come with Brembos, they suck compared to those two. As far as the luxury features and, and the cruise control, the electric steering dampeners, everything, I really like it. Some people really despise the asymmetrical headlights. Now that the new bike is going to have symmetrical headlights, and I liked it. I really do like the way that this bike here definitely provides you a different style look. And when you saw this bike coming down the road, you automatically knew that it was a BMW. This bike is the shit, and we'll see if the new one does it for me. I probably won't get rid of this one, but we'll have to see when that one comes out. But out of all of my bikes, yes, it doesn't make the most torque. I think it makes just about the most horsepower or whatever. It doesn't have to, for sure it's the fastest, but that's not why I like it because it's the fastest. I like it because it's still the all-around best motorcycle to do everything with. As far as leaning, as far as stopping, as far as braking, as far as turning, as far as comfort, gas mileage, wrenching on it. I don't mind wrenching on it. Sure, it's a little tight here and there, and it's got some odds and quirks. Hey, it's German, but hey, for overall, it's great. Its biggest downfall is the price. And when you load up a Beamer and stuff like that, you're at about 30 G's and stuff like that. Tax, title, license, stock fee, this, that, whatever. I don't care if they say the bike is $21,000. It's what you pay for it when it walks out of the door. That's really what you're paying. The bike is 30 G's, okay? And when you load this thing up with every feature that you can absolutely get on it, it's pushing about 30 G's. And the new one with the M competition package is going to be just right there about the same, just as the Ducatis are. So I really love this bike, and I have nothing but great things to say about this bike. And if someone asks me and comes up and says, hey, you have a great collection and stuff like that, of all of your bikes, which one do you love and which one would you pick and recommend the most? Hands down, 100% by a country mile, it would be the BMW. If you have to factor in price, for sure it would be the GSX-R, but all around, no questions asked, the BMW wins in the category for all around best bike. So that's going to wrap it up for today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed that. It was definitely a little bit of a different video. Like what you saw, again, don't forget to subscribe. Facebook, Instagram, at Speedbug, same name here as YouTube. And we will catch you here for another episode here on the Speedbug channel. Deuces.